Hey there, I'm back with our read aloud book, Escaping the Nazis on the Kindertransport. We just finished chapter 5 about a girl named Irene, and that entire chapter was like written by her in like her journal. And so chapter 6 is called Stranded in Warsaw, and the boy's name is Hans Schneider. And at the beginning of the chapter, there is a photograph of Hans waiting for his flight to Prague at the Warsaw airport in November of 1938. So let me show you that picture real quick. So there he is. Warsaw is in the country of Poland, by the way, in case you were wondering. All right, says, we received an order to leave this country within 48 hours. This order was then changed. We may stay until November 9th. It would be our great good fortune if the matter of Hansel were settled by then. We are infinitely grateful to you for your efforts, and I wish I could prove this to you someday. And this was a paragraph from a letter written by Bella Schneider, who is Hans's mother, to a member of the Dutch Committee to Help Foreign Children. In March 1938, Hans Schneider was 11 years old. He lived with his parents in Vienna, Austria. Bella and Hugo Schneider were both dentists. The Nazis had taken control of Austria. Bella and Hugo knew that their non-Jewish patients would refuse to see a Jewish dentist. The Schneiders would lose their livelihood. And more than that, no one knew how dangerous the Nazi regime might become. It was worse than they imagined. Soon after the Nazis took control, a man in a Nazi uniform showed up at the door of the Schneiders' dental practice. He told them that he was a dentist and he was going to take over one of the 2 examination rooms. It was legal for a non-Jew to take over any Jewish business or home. Hans was struggling at school. Prejudice and discrimination against Jews were becoming worse. One day, the headmaster at Hans's school called all the Jewish boys out into the courtyard. True German children would no longer associate with them, he said. Pay no attention, Hugo and Bella told Hans, but they could not deny, they did not try to deny, that the situation for Jews in Austria was becoming terrible. At this point, Austria was officially considered part of Germany. There were more and more restrictions, more and more prejudice, more and more hate. Something had to be done. Hugo and Bella were cautious people, but the time for caution had passed. At this point, before the war had begun, the Nazis hoped to drive the Jews out of their homeland. Jews were allowed to leave. However, if they tried to leave Germany, they might not have anywhere to go. At this time, it was extremely difficult to get permission to enter another country. Nonetheless, Hugo and Bella and Hans decided they had to try. In June 1938, they left their life in Vienna. They boarded a train for Czechoslovakia. They were now refugees. This time, luck smiled on the Schneiders. Someone, somewhere, had bribed the Czech border guard. The train entered Czechoslovakia illegally. Here's another letter from Isabella Schneider, which is Hugo's mother, to the member of the Dutch Committee to Help Foreign Children. It says, Dear Mrs. Coster, please don't be angry that I asked you to speed up the matter. Our situation here is so uncertain that I hardly know whether an acceptance that offers only after a few weeks would still find us here. We are here completely dependent on our relatives who themselves do not know how their situation will develop in the next few weeks. That is why we would be so glad to know that our child has reached safety. Should this matter be delayed for some time despite your kind efforts, then it would help us greatly if you knew of a Dutch family in Poland, in Warsaw or elsewhere, who would be ready to keep Hansel until his departure. Hans and his parents went to live in Karviná, Czechoslovakia, with Hugo's brother. But soon, this part of Czechoslovakia became part of Poland. It was illegal for the Schneiders to live in Poland. Once again, the family was in danger. Bella wrote again to Jacoba Koster-Lucas, who was a member of the Dutch Committee to Help Foreign Children. Could she find a place for Hans in Holland? Bella wrote to Jacoba again and again. Her letters grew more desperate as time passed. At last, a place was found for Hans in a Quaker school in Holland. What's more, it was a school specifically for German and Austrian refugee children. Hans would be safe. But first he had to get there. In October 1938, Hans and his father flew to Warsaw, Poland to get Hans's visa from the Dutch authorities at the consulate there. Then, he needed to get to Holland without entering Germany, so he would have to fly on a plane to Prague, Czechoslovakia. From Prague, he could travel to Holland and to his school. Air travel in the 1930s was rare and expensive. Hans would be one of the very few children on the Kindertransport to travel this way. Here's another letter from Hans's mother. First of all, my heartfelt thanks. I can hardly express in words how happy and grateful we are that Hansel has been granted an entry permit. This letter then explains why Hans got held up in Warsaw. Hansel was intensely looking forward to his getting out of here, and it must have been a big disappointment to him. But in Warsaw, the plane that Hans needed to take to safety was grounded because of bad weather. When would there be another plane? Not for 10 days. Hans could not stay in Warsaw. He and his father had no identity papers. They did not have permission to be there. They were in Poland illegally, and if they were found out, they could be deported. If they were deported, Hans could not make it to Prague. He would not make it to safety. Hans was stranded, and Warsaw was honeycombed with Nazis. Hans and Hugo could not get a room in the hotel. No hotel would take someone without papers. They could not sleep on the street. Instead, Hugo grabbed the nearest, neatly dressed man he saw. Speaking quickly and urgently, he explained that he needed to find a place for his young son to stay. Hugo did not know who this man was. He did not know if he would report them to the Nazis, but he was desperate. The man was kind. He sent Hans to stay with a diplomat at the German embassy. The family told Hans to say that he was a relative from Vienna. Only later did Hans find out how close he had come to deportation. That man on the street had been a Polish police officer working in the department charged with deporting illegal aliens. With Hans safe at the embassy, Hugo made his way back to Karvina. Why would the German embassy shelter a young Jewish boy? Why would the police officer work against his own department? Many years later, Hans could only guess that the police officer and the member of the German embassy were both involved with underground anti-Nazi resistance, those who fought the Nazis in secret. It was sheer luck. Days later, Hans finally boarded his plane. As it rose into the night sky, he may have stared out the window, thinking of his many close escapes, of the luck that had helped him along the way. We can picture him wondering what his new life would be like, and if he would ever see his parents again. That's the end of that chapter, and there's a photo here. It says a section of the 8-foot-high concrete wall encircling the Jewish ghetto in Warsaw, Poland. So if you've ever heard of the ghetto during Nazi times, it was like they would section off a section or a part of the city that only the Jewish people could live in. It was usually very poor, and they would be all crammed together in small spaces. Okay, end of chapter 6. Next video will be on to chapter 7. See you soon.